Arizona. Upon arrival at the Arizona state line, I saw a gas station and was praising the sun gods. After miles of nothing, I decided to splurge on a little snack. I browsed the store and noticed there weren't prices on anything. I asked the attendant about the price of a pastry, and she said, well, I guess those are $2.99. Yeah, $2.99. I bought a drink and some trail mix. It ended up being over $5. My theory on the lack of prices is that they can capitalize on being the only gas station for miles. They make up prices depending on how well they like a customer. I may never know the truth, but I still had a quick respite with snacks. My body felt like a bottomless gas tank needing to be filled, so I constantly ate throughout the day. I generally carried Ziploc bags full of trail mix and Cheez-Its, but my favorite was pretzel sticks. The combination of salt and carbs made it perfect for energy and enjoyment. The sun continued to destroy my soul and scorch my bodies in ways I never thought possible. I remember being a kid playing outside all day and not even considering the sunburn. There is no shade out there. Absolutely none. Trees don't grow in the sand. Mountains are miles away from the road. The temperature wasn't that bad, yet the rays of sunlight pouring onto my body for hours began to wear on me. I learned fast that I needed to wear long sleeves to endure the burning sun for 12 hours a day. The sun's warmth exhausts your body, and it's a battle you fight all day long. My first experience in the desert was during a mild month. I don't know if I would have made it with the same amount of water had it been 20 degrees hotter. I learned how exposure to the elements can rattle your soul. I drank so much more water than I expected as I tried to ration per the advice I received in Joshua Tree. My drinking quickly outpaced my supply. I became very focused on my water rations so I could make it to each planned stop without running out of water. The roads in Arizona changed quite a bit from in California. My routes were usually on 2-lane 70-mile-an-hour U.S. highways, and the terrain varied. I gained a shoulder, which was good, but there were cracky bumps every 12 to 16 inches, the kind of bumps that tree roots create in sidewalks. I had to ride this bumpy wave for miles before the shoulder was erased altogether. All I had left was a painted line with a rumble strip built into it. That meant I had to ride entirely in the lane of this semi-truck infested desert highway. This was on par with what most of my Arizona experience would entail. You know the phrase, like a sitting duck? That's where I was emotionally. I tried to feel out the moment anytime a vehicle would pass me, and I'd ride into the dirt if there wasn't enough room. I tried my hardest to tune into my senses. I could usually tell how far a semi or car was by the sound distance, but every once in a while I would miscalculate and feel the air start to swirl before a truck would pass. The force that a semi carries while driving 70 miles an hour can physically suck you underneath the trailer. I experienced a horrifying situation. 2 semi-trucks coming from both directions pass at the same time. The truck on my side had no room to swerve out of my way while the other truck was storming at him from the opposite direction. I knew the situation I was in and had to act aggressively. As soon as I felt the wind off a trailer and saw the truck for a split second in my peripheral vision, I cranked to the right as fast as I could, diving into the sand at all cost. I made it off the road safely, and those truckers didn't even blink. I simply wanted to get to my campsite without being killed. Is that too much to ask for? Semi-truck traffic is no joke. I made it safely to the BLM camp on a bumpy red clay patch of arid land. Each day of camping would be about the same. I would park my bike, unload my camp gear first, and then unattach the bike bags from the bike racks. Once I was organized, I set up a tarp on the ground and installed the tent on top. All my bags acted as weights on the four corners of the tent interior. I'd fashion a little sleeping area, pillow, sleep mat, and sleeping bag. I usually cooked dinner right after that and read or wrote until the sun went down. 9 or 10 p.m. was an average bedtime, while sunset was just around 7 p.m. In the mornings, I would have about the same protocol packing out. I always hoped for a tree or rock to lean my bike against, to strap everything down with bungees. I was waking up at 5:30 a.m. to be on the road by time the sun was coming up. I always dug a hole the night before so I could be prepared to do my business first thing in the morning. Most days, I ate a bagel with peanut butter for breakfast, though I was ready to eat at any restaurant that revealed itself. I went through the town of Parker, Arizona. They had a Walmart and a McDonald's right next to each other. I laughed because this was the most American thing I'd ever seen. This was the first of many breakfast stops at a McDonald's. Also, it was the beginning of a coffee addiction that I never thought could overtake me. I met an older gentleman who ate there every Thursday. He was impressed by my ride and gave me a couple of bucks to support. Ironically, his cash helped me out because breakfast cost me $16. Parker patriotically imposed an additional tourist tax. God bless capitalism. Arizona had some of the worst rural highways I'd ever ridden, even to this day. The bumpy shoulders rattled my brain and numbed my hands during the 85-mile days. I developed internal bruising that caused the palms of my hands to feel on fire constantly. I had to ride with my fingertips to avoid putting pressure on my palms. To put this in perspective, I was already changing hand positions every 1 to 3 minutes to keep my arms from falling asleep or causing too much pressure on any given part of my body. I had never considered the different pressure points caused by specific positioning. If your seat isn't angled right, you will lean forward too hard and hurt your back. If your handlebars are bent forward enough, there's no counterbalance from how you're sitting, and you will put too much pressure on your hands and arms. The sweet spot is to keep most of your weight on the tailbone and attempt to float between the counterbalance. Riding 12 hours daily was the ultimate test to dial in all of my bike adjustments. I really don't know how I survived. The combination of sun, pain, and lack of society was wearing on my psyche. I had a KOA campground to look forward to near the town of Hope. No pun intended. I found a large boulder 4 miles from the camp as the sun was setting. It cast a large shadow on the shoulder of the road, and I couldn't believe it. I hadn't seen shade since before the sun came up that morning. I threw my bike down and ran to lay in the shade for about 10 minutes. It felt like stepping out of the beach and into a cool shower, or someone wrapping you in a blanket on a cold day. I laid on the asphalt curled up in the fetal position, trying to soak in the cool air. I've never experienced this specific type of relief in my life. That boulder was my savior of the day. I might be losing my mind sooner than I thought. I checked into the campground, showered, then hit the hot tub and pool. My body was stiff and cooked. At some point, I started talking to my neighbor about his camper van. He had a conversion van about the size of a 15-passenger church bus, and I had never seen a camper on that kind of chassis before. It was an early 90s Ford conversion van built in Canada. Leon and his wife Catherine are from British Columbia and were on a relaxing American road trip. They invited me for dinner and cooked pork chops, sweet potatoes, and asparagus. My burning metabolism inhaled as much food as they would offer. They had been traveling for what seemed to be 2 years and told me all about their adventures. I explained that I wanted to visit Europe someday, and they gave me the lowdown about all the countries they had seen so far. They were very friendly and didn't seem to let things like the news overtake their lives. Leon had campaigned for Parliament a few years before and got 36% of the vote. He said Canadian politics are overrun by right-leaning conservatives and that not enough relevant liberals are running for office. Sounds familiar. They said when coming to America, they decided to not take any sides on our politics. We don't need to worry too much about it. We just want to go out and travel. They invited me to stay in their home if I could detour into BC when I made it up north. I appreciated how hospitable they were and felt hopeful after being treated so kindly by strangers. I slated Phoenix, Arizona as my first official day off and wanted nothing more than to shower and lay on a carpeted floor. I was still 2 days away and felt my body was burnt to a crisp. My bike shorts rode high on my legs and my cycling jersey high on my arms. Sunblock was not helping me. I was a lobster. Waking up early gave me the advantage of the cool air, but when 9 a.m. rolled around, the sun was at total capacity. Starting early also allowed me to do extra mileage. I made it 55 miles to my slated destination by 1 p.m. The town didn't particularly speak to me, so I texted my host in Phoenix and asked if it was cool that I showed up a day early. He said that would work, and I barged an additional 63 miles straight to my host's apartment. Skipping a day to ride extra miles would become a pastime on this trip. The thought of interacting with people and being somewhere was too good a reward to take it easy on my body. Around dinner time, I met a 70-year-old man named Bob. He parked on the shoulder ahead of me and flagged me down to talk. He had biked across America the year before and was a part of the bike hosting network that I was using. He offered up his home for the night, but I explained that I already had a place to stay. He gave me his number and told me to contact him if I ever needed anything on my journey, and that he might be traveling somewhere else along my path later on. It was creepy, yet endearing. I had already decided I would force myself to be uncomfortable and allow experiences to happen as they come. More on Bob later. I arrived at my host's apartment around 9:30 p.m., and I looked rough. I was soaked in sweat, my entire body was sunburnt, and I looked like I had just survived a fire. I was staying with a friend of a friend named Lance. Lance is a tall gentleman, not much older than me, and seemingly optimistic. I don't think he had any expectations for what I would look like, but when he answered the door, he nearly laughed and gave me a bear hug. I could barely say any words, but I asked if I could shower quickly. I ate a late dinner and did laundry while we got to know each other. Lance was engaged, had a twin brother, and a roommate who was recording an album. The next day, Lance introduced me to his fiancée and his twin brother's family over lunch. He was also nice enough to take me to REI to upgrade my wardrobe to light long-sleeve sun shirts and hiking pants. I was on a mission to beat the sun, and this outdoorsman's paradise would help me do it. Oh, my poor budget. Chris and I had been joking for years about the type of people who shop at REI. We imagined the prime clientele being 30-somethings wearing sunglasses with perfect teeth, rolling up in a Subaru and asking if they have the latest North Face item. The truth is, the employees are generally more outdoorsy and active than most of the customers. Lance had to go to work early, so I didn't get to see him before I left town the next day. I left him a letter thanking him for giving me a place to stay and the time to take me around town. It took me 20 miles to ride back into the desert. While I toured the suburbs, I met this Hispanic dude named Dino. He was riding a matte black mountain bike with no brakes and wearing NASCAR sunglasses. He'd lived in Phoenix for a long time and had 2 kids and a wife. He was a mason by trade, but explained that his truck's transmission went out and that he was screwed until he could get it fixed. He asked me for directions to Mesa, and I told him I didn't know the area very well either. I was pretty hyped that he was willing to ride a bike to get around, rather than let his broken truck rule his destiny. Bob, whom I met on the highway earlier, warned me about a dangerous highway tunnel with no shoulder through the mountains past Superior, Arizona. He suggested I take an alternate route around it. There was an old 1920s one-lane highway that the state had turned into a walking trail. The tunnel looked like it had been dynamited out by some prospectors. It sat about 100 feet below the new highway. Instead of being a straight shot through the mountain, it ascended a slow curve before finally meeting with the new US 60 again. I had been climbing elevations since leaving the Phoenix area and was not stoked for one more mountain. This trail was part dirt, part gravel, and part decrepit road. Each section revealed itself randomly to my dismay. I was in my granny gear the whole way up. Cute signs were strewn about the trail, talking about the history of it all, and no guardrails. It felt natural and rugged. It was the highlight of my day, even as treacherous as it was. I was constantly taking photos and stopping to enjoy the scenery. It was about 5 p.m., and I needed to get to the campsite before dark. After an hour of climbing, I made it to the tunnel and had to walk my bike through it. It was 12 feet tall, maybe 10 feet wide, and filled with huge rocks instead of gravel. The walls were filled with graffiti and endearing carvings from lovers. I popped out the other side and was immediately thrust into an ascent on the main highway again. There was no shoulder, and I rode directly on the white line, butted up with a metal barrier on the right. Deep cliffs and jagged rock were on the other side of this railing. That's a hell of a way to end the day. At the top, I found the sign for the BLM campground. It said the elevation was 4,000 feet. The town of Superior was at 2886. I just climbed a mountain on a dirt road for 1,200 feet. Wow. I followed the curvy dirt road into the campground, and another sign pointed left, taking me onto an even worse road with literal craters. I'm talking about 8 to 10 foot diameter holes missing from the road. I started seeing little pull-offs in the distance, which I assumed were campsites. I saw a handful of trailers and tents down the way. I quickly discovered that this road ended and stepped down an amphitheater size of granite boulders. I had not been prepared for this much off-roading. I rubbed my brakes to the metal, trying to take it slow, and bumped my way through the last leg of riding into camp. I got to the point where I couldn't even ride anymore and had to carry my bike down the terrain. I got to the bottom and staked my claim on a campsite. I looked back at the ridge I had just come down from and scoffed. It was hazardous and ridiculous in hindsight. Now that I had the whole area in perspective, I found out there was a legitimate entrance on the far side that resembled a road rather than a mountain. Just my luck. I hung out inside my tent to take a break and found insects flying around. I was trying to avoid letting them into my tent at all costs. I went to bed a little after dark and breathed relief after a long day. In the morning, I woke up to a mosquito the size of a horsefly on my sleeping bag. In true Jumanji fashion, I immediately killed it and felt relieved. I got on the highway and it was seemingly flat, but I felt gravity holding me back. I experienced my first ghost grade. The Department of Transportation measures mountainous elevation changes in grade percentages. So anytime you drive in the mountains, you'll see a 6% or 8% sign to warn you of the steepness. A ghost grade is essentially an illusion to our brains. My perception can't reconcile the difference between what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling. The grade and surroundings create a level perspective, but my muscles told me otherwise. I couldn't believe I was losing my sense of direction and angles. Again, there was no shoulder, and I was hugging the metal guard with a death-filled cliff on the other side. The only way I could survive my fear was to look directly down the line and breathe hard when a vehicle passed by. Concentration is key. Nothing will humble you more than being passed by a semi going 70 miles an hour while riding on a narrow, shoulderless highway. Thorn bushes hung over the guardrails, and I'd have to take one hand off the handlebars to avoid getting cut up. I was relieved every time I didn't die on roads like that. I was so angry at those heartless drivers. The ascension through the beautiful canyon was like a roller coaster. I imagined it being like Six Flags over Texas, and everything is southwestern themed. Fake rocks and mountains everywhere. They have that one famous roller coaster. This road is that roller coaster, but instead of being buckled in on a safe train-like device that's scientifically engineered for illusions of tight spaces, you are on a train going 3 miles an hour up a hill with semis roaring as close as possible to you without a seatbelt. All you have is a little red flashing light and some reflective bike shorts. It's the ultimate thrill. I found a Walmart in Globe, Arizona, and grabbed a bag of chips with guacamole for lunch. Such a treat when I'd been eating canned tuna and ramen bombs for days. This town had previously been a mining mecca, and it still tried to survive off the reputation that preceded it. They had memorials and museums. You could visit all the mining caves and tell that they were proud of the old blue-collar America we used to know. While riding out of town, I saw another cyclist riding in the opposite direction. We both locked eyes like we hadn't seen another soul in weeks. I wasn't sure how to react because it seemed weird to just wave her down out of excitement. I saw her bust a U-turn and ride over to me. I was excited to meet my first touring cyclist. Her name was Sabina, and she had been living in Germany working for BMW. She took a 6-month sabbatical to ride gravel trails across the country, then hike the Pacific Crest Trail north to Canada. We shared stories about our adventures and admired each other's bike setups. I found it fascinating to develop minimalist and efficient packing designs. Some people nerd out on car paint jobs, but we like to analyze how we packed our bikes for 6 months of being homeless. I gave her my info, but she never sent me a line after that day. I was sad because I thought she was very kind and I wanted to hear about her journey. I have this recurring theme where people I'm fond of blow through the wind of my life, and I have to learn how to move on. The people I'm most connected with constantly move towards something else, and I'm stuck. That night, I planned to stay on a reservation of the San Carlos Apache people. I had an address to my host home, but their directions could have been more precise. There were no street signs, and the houses weren't even marked. I only knew that I was looking for a house next to an elementary school. Eventually, I hit a dead end and found some folks that looked at me strangely. I explained what I was looking for, and they were having a hard time understanding me because they didn't recognize the names of my hosts. I was starting to feel embarrassed, but some kids on bikes knew who I was looking for and showed me the way. It ended up only being a couple of blocks down the street. I connected with Joe and Debbie. They were both pastors and ran a Lutheran school and church on the reservation. They were also avid cyclists and loved to host traveling strangers. This church had been there for nearly 30 years, and it seemed to positively impact the community. Religion and assimilation are two things that have always rubbed me the wrong way as I get older and learn about the dark history of colonization. In 1848, Mexico ceded much of the western states to the U.S. government at the end of the Mexican-American War. When the U.S. took possession of the land, they started allowing U.S. settlers to claim it. But this meant the government would force the existing Apache and other native people off of the homeland that they had inhabited for centuries before the U.S. came into existence. In 1871, the San Carlos, among other reservations, was established, and the government forcibly relocated the Apache into these areas, leaving their homes to be privatized by white settlers. The combination of manifest destiny and colonization made me uneasy while considering the history of this place. Nonetheless, I was excited to hear the story of this married couple and how they ended up in the middle of a desert community running a school. They seemed to be very loving and accepting of the ways that reservation life had taught them. They cooked a humongous meal for dinner, and they had Wi-Fi. They set me up in the guest bedroom, which was decorated as if a little girl lived there. We talked for a while before they had to leave to host a Bible study, so I wouldn't see them again until morning. But boy, was it worth it when we got to breakfast. There was eggs, bacon, and sausage. Debbie had also made an entire tray of peanut butter protein balls for me to take on the road. I learned a lot about the politics of reservations, and I left with the conclusion that it's sort of a welfare socialist state. Everyone is dependent on the tribe leaders to distribute the funds that their community is given by the government. But of course, there's this dissonance between tradition and modernization that I think the Native community may not have reconciled yet. And that is where we see unfortunate realities like substance addiction and struggling economies. These things can be argued all day long, and ultimately, I come from the belief that what America did to natives in the development of the West is wrong, unjust, and still perpetuated. There seems to be this expected assimilation to Western culture instead of Western civilization being affected by native culture. We will never have a perfect world, but what was done can never be forgiven or reconciled. I rode back into the desert with deep contemplation heavy on my heart. I clumsily dropped things off of my bike during these first 2 weeks on the road. I was constantly throwing clothes to dry under my bungee straps, but they would tend to fly off. I lost 2 pairs of bike shorts that way. Significant waste of $160. I dropped my phone several times while attempting to take photos one-handed. When I hit bumps, my water bottles would launch out of their cages. Snacks would bounce out of my hands while eating. It was getting out of control. One of the most disheartening instances was while I was waiting in line at a McDonald's. I had 2 empty water bottles in my hands to fill up. They both slipped and dropped onto the ground. I don't know if I got lazy or lost balance, but they both ended up on the floor. One dropped head first and cracked completely open, rendering it useless. The surviving bottle was already broken and would drip even when the spout was closed. It really bothered me. I attempted to force the drinking tab in because it seemed stuck, and I popped the whole mechanism out. There was a gaping hole in the lid with the latch and spout floating in the water. I was 2 bottles down, and it's my own fault. This is life on the road. I was brutally reminded daily that the entire state of Arizona conveniently hadn't repaved in 20 years. Riding on these back highways was so bumpy with cracks that it felt like someone was punching my taint with a little hammer and chisel. Imagine you're on a road bike, and someone set out several golf clubs sitting out a bike's length apart from each other for 400 miles. I was so raw. Also, my pleather bike seat started to develop a small rip, the equivalent of a dull X-Acto knife slowly sawing away at my shorts. Not the most comfortable combination, but at least it's exciting, right? I traveled 3 different deserts, the Colorado, the Mojave, and starting my way into the Chihuahua as I pedaled closer to New Mexico. As far as I'm concerned, it was one big desert all the way to central Texas. I'm a fan of the Arizona landscape, though. It's alive and full of color. I went through the Superstition Mountains, trekked Gold Canyon, and experienced the Tonto National Forest. Arizona's desert has much more greenery. I think that's why it generally was more breezy than California. There was cactus everywhere, and the mountain canyons were a spectacle. They offered a distinct beauty in capturing light and skewing my perception. The rock formations themselves have a composure that sparks the imagination. The desert has taught me patience, frustration, safety, preparation, and humility. I'm gonna need some new undies soon.